You are listening to The Underground Subway with host David Alston, a podcast dedicated to giving you the strategies to live a free and better life. Here is David Alston.
Hi, I'm David Alston, host of The Underground Subway, and I want to welcome you to this particular podcast that has one goal and one purpose, and that is giving you the tools, the strategies, the ideas, and the concepts needed for you to live a better, more productive, and freer life. How can I live a life that's more productive than what it is? How can I live a life that's full of liberty? Well, in order to live a life of liberty, that word means that you're able to function, to think, to act, to react, to move, to live, and to exist without restraints. Oftentimes in life, we function with restraints that we don't know about. The great Harriet Tubman once said, "I could have freed a lot more slaves if only they knew that they were slaves." That means some people had chains holding them back that they didn't even realize. That's the purpose of the Underground Subway. This podcast is dedicated to revealing the chains, showing you the things that are holding us back, and then putting the ball in your hands, placing it in your court, where you, my friend, can make the necessary moves to do what's necessary to live a better life, not just for you, but for your entire family and for the next generation. And so this podcast is dedicated to bringing you quality and qualified guests. We're going to share their experiences, to share their life struggles, their life goals, their life battles, and how they overcame, and how, because they overcame, you can as well. I'm excited beyond measure to bring to you a qualified and quality guest for this edition of the Underground Subway. I've had a lot of guests, but I've got a good, dynamic, powerful guest on for this edition. Let me tell you a little bit about our guest for the Underground Subway. His name is Mark Chartier. And Mark Chartier always believe, his motto is, always believe you can make a difference, but never let your differences keep you from what you believe. Let me tell you a little bit about him. Mark has a particular message, and that is his core message, what I just read to you. His message is to audience members when speaking about building and developing positive relationships, overcoming disabilities, abuse, and mental illness, and accepting and embracing human diversity in our ever-changing world of idiosyncrasies and social biases. Every day, Mark mentors students who must overcome serious challenges, but he knows that they can persevere. Why? Because he did. Mark grew up with Tourette's syndrome. He had a poor grades and he demonstrated significant behaviors. But thanks to positive relationships with his educators, he was able to defy expectations and succeed in school. Let me bring to the Underground Subway, help me welcome my guest, Mark Chartier. Mark, thank you so much for joining the Underground Subway, my friend.
Thank you for having me, David. It's a pleasure and honor to be here with you.
Tell us a little bit about your story in regard to your bio talks about some of your past struggles with disabilities, etc. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and then I want to talk about disabilities, how you deal with a disability, whether it's being labeled or what have you. Let's talk about that, but tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, great. Well, I was born in Montreal, Quebec, Canada, and I grew up on Long Island, New York, and I grew up in the 80s, and of course back then Tourette's wasn't very well known, and so I went through all of my school career pretty much up until 12th grade without a diagnosis of Tourette's, even though I had symptoms from age 7 on. And I very specifically remember the first tic that I had, and it was when my mother, who was schizophrenic, she's passed away since then, but her and my father were going through a divorce, a separation at that time. And my mother had custody of me at the time, even though my father was fighting to obtain permanent sole custody of me. And my mother just kind of went on a mental health binge, if you will, is kind of how I describe it as. She would take me and we would go to restaurants and order food, and then 5 minutes later she'd be grabbing me and we'd be running out of the restaurant. And she did that with me and taking me to the hospital, and same thing, just taking me and running out at odd for some odd reason. I'm sure it made sense to her at the time, but again, it was like her schizophrenia was kind of taking over her. And anyways, during this situation, we were in the car for days, and I remember always asking her about camp, and it was a very sad story that ended up being a poem, and a poem that's part of a manuscript that I'm working on now. And during this time, I had a spiral notebook, and I took the spiral notebook and I ran it across my lips, and I did it back and forth until it felt just right. And by the time it felt just right, my lips were bloodied and blistered, and that was the first tic that I remember having. Growing up throughout elementary school, my tics kind of waxed and waned. Kids used to actually name my tics. So I had one tic where I shifted my head side to side, and they called that the twister. And then I had another tic where I would rotate my head around, kind of like in a circular motion, and they named that around the world. And then I had a third tic with my head that was kind of a synthesis of the two that they called the works. And the kids that at recess actually used to pay me to do these tics. And they used to pay me a nickel for the twister, a dime for around the world, and a quarter for the works. And I'll tell you, I sometimes I feel like I should have kept charging, because with inflation, I think I'd be doing pretty good right about now. So I went through school without ever knowing what Tourette's was. I did these things for no known reason at the time. And it wasn't until my senior year in high school that my dad's girlfriend at the time read an article about Tourette's. And she said, "Hey, this looks like Mark. Like, this article perfectly describes Mark." And so my dad took me to a neurologist, and I was diagnosed then. I think it was a few weeks short of my 18th birthday. And when I first found out I had Tourette's, I didn't want to talk to anybody about it. I didn't even want to talk to my dad about it. I was in shock that there was something different about me, something awry. And so I really closed myself off to a lot of people. And then I finally, I developed some pretty good relationships with educators in high school. One of them, of all people, was a detention lady, because I had some pretty significant behaviors that got me in a lot of trouble. And as a result, I spent a lot of time in detention. But she was one person. Her name was Mrs. Tracy, and she was one person that I formed a really strong motherly relationship, because from age 7 on, I didn't have a mother in my life, and so I really responded well to motherly figures and nurturing relationships. And so this lady befriended me, and I formed a positive relationship with her. And there was another few teachers throughout my experience in high school and elementary school that formed positive relationships with me. And so fast forward about 20 years or so, I'm in college. I had recently sustained a brain injury at that time, and I'm talking about year 2001, 2002. I had recently sustained a brain injury at that time that caused me to develop a significant stutter. And to be honest with you, I wasn't ready to go out into the big bad world and get a job. I was nearing nearing the conclusion of my bachelor's degree in English, and so I thought about next steps, and I thought about who made a big impact in my life? And the answer was easy. It was teachers and educators. And so as a result, I thought, well, I want to help kids that had similar struggles as me. I want to help kids with disabilities. And so I applied for a master's degree program in Colorado Springs, at a university in Colorado Springs. And I got accepted, and I completed the program in about 2 years. And shortly after that, I got my first job in special education. And I just fell madly in love with the profession, with the art of teaching. And I found that my students realized that, hey, Mr. C is not like every other teacher. There's something unique and something different about him. And as a result, I was able to form very unique and positive and powerful, formidable relationships with these students that have endured the test of time, because 14, 15 years later in my career, there are some kids that I had my first, second, third year that are adults now that I still keep in touch with to this day. And so I was able to form those positive relationships. And as a result, I feel like I was equally as blessed and fortunate to have them in my life, my students that I formed those relationships with, because I found as I went through as my career evolved, I realized that a lot of the things that my students were going through were things that I was going through even as an adult. Because having a disability or disabilities doesn't get easier. They don't go away when you turn 30 or 40 or 45. Like these things, they stick with you for life. And sometimes they get harder and sometimes they get easier. I haven't, there's a lot of literature that states that Tourette's gets better as you get older. Mine hasn't had that effect. Mine's pretty much sustained or stayed its course. It hasn't really improved too much. And so, so I could go on, but that's my keynote speech. And my keynote speech is an hour and a half, and I know we don't have an hour and a half. So I'll stop there and let you ask the next question.
Well, let me ask you, because you talked about having a disability growing up and how it doesn't stop, and how you're still dealing with it as a teacher. Has your disability helped, or has it been a challenge to your ability to be a special education teacher?
Well, I would say both. When I first started teaching, I was not very open about sharing my disability with kids right away. That changed about 4 or 5 months in. I remember when I first began teaching, my stuttering was worse than what it is now. It was not as significant as it was shortly after the brain injury, but it was still pretty present at the time. And so speaking in front of a group of kids, whether it's 60 or 90 kids at recess, or speaking in front of 3 or 4 or 5, 6 kids with disabilities in a small group, when you're faced with that task, you learn to get over, you learn to compensate and perform, right? I learned really quickly that I had to overcome many aspects of my disabilities to be the best for my students. At the same time, shortly after I started, I realized that in order to be real with my students, I needed to be real about my plights in life, right? And so I remember speaking to a student. I was having a coughing tic at the time, and she said, "Oh, Mr. C, are you sick?" I said, No, I just have something about me that causes me to do these weird things when I get nervous." And she says, "Oh, I'm like that too." I'm like, "Oh, really?" She's like, "Yeah." I'm like, oh, great. Well, then you understand. And she said, yeah, absolutely, I understand. I said, well, we're twins then. She goes, no, we're not twins. I said, why? She says, because I have hair and you don't, because I'm bald. and so and so and so she said, and I said, well, I had hair when I was a kid. She said, yeah, I'm sure you did. And so that was one of my first memories of opening up to a student about my challenges. And even now, like I'm pretty frank about it. Like if I'm working with a fourth or fifth grader, I'll tell them, I'll say, hey, Mr. C has Tourette's. Do you know what that is? And I'll explain it. And if I'm working with a younger student, whether it's a kindergartner or first grader, I probably won't use the word Tourette's, but I'll just explain that when Mr. C gets nervous, he does things, and so it's been challenging that way. But at the same time, like I'm authentic, and at my students, when I talk about diversity and accepting other. Or whether they're a different ethnicity or speak a different language, I talk about the importance of accepting and embracing diversity. And that's what that saying is that you cited at the beginning. Because I always tell my students, I'm like, how boring would life be if we were all the same? Right. Like I found throughout my life that I learned the most from people who are different than me. Mm-hmm. And I might not always agree with them, but I've learned about life from people who are different from me. And so
that's right.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this question, Mark, because you talked about the incident that you had with the student that you call the twin. I can imagine that you have a tremendously good relationship with students at your school that have disabilities, or the students that you work with. Talk to us about how you're perceived, or how is the understanding of students that are not children with disabilities. You know, I've worked in special ed for years, and it's always the two. It's the special education, and then there's regular education. I can imagine that the special education students sort of bond with you because, quite frankly, when you have spent your life with a disability, they probably feel like you're one of them. What about the regular ed student that passes you in the hallway, that sees you in the cafeteria or out at the buses, etc., that notice the disability? How is the reaction or relationship with them?
Well, that's a great question. Thank you for asking that. That's not a question I've been asked a lot, but it's a very important question. And it's a long answer, but I'm going to do my best to keep it concise.
Yeah, take your time.
I have found so for one, my first response to that is that I am usually a mainstay in the school culture. I've worked primarily in 3 schools for most of my career, and in each school I have been a staple of the school culture within the school community. So I have been in charge of PBIS, which stands for Positive Behavior Intervention Supports, for several schools. I've actually brought it to a school in Denver and a school in Pueblo West, where I currently teach now. And the focus behind that is promoting positive behavior. And so as a result, I've actually written raps and performed raps about positive behavior at school assemblies. And I get kids all the time, gen ed kids, saying, hey, Mr. C, did you really write that rap? I'm like, yep, I sure did. They're like, oh, that's awesome. I love that. And so, like, I've actually had kids come to me who want to be rappers and ask me about, helping them with the rhymes. And so, in addition to that, I also at several schools have taught a poetry workshop because poetry is. So I always tell people, teaching is the love of my life, but poetry is the second love of my life. And so I've been writing poetry for about 25 years now. And I even had a book published several years ago called Fingerprints. And as a way of giving back to the next generation of writers, I do a poetry workshop with kids at schools that not only teach kids how to write and express their emotions through poetry, but it also culminates in a poetry reading where the kids get to read their poems in front of an audience that's made up of parents and teachers and educators and students. And so I've had a wonderful experience with that. Just a great following. It's one of those things when I started at one school, I had maybe 5 or 6 the first year, and then the next year it spreads like wildfire. I've got 15 kids in it the next time. I'm doing 2 or 3 of them a semester. And so it's really been, it's really gotten a great following over the years at each school. And so because of that, the kids are very familiar with me. And as far as how they respond to my disability, I would say they respond almost always positively. Now, every now and then, now I do have a lazy eye, which is part of my visual impairments. And occasionally students will, make a comment about that. But overall, my Tourette's, they don't really seem to notice. I don't know if it's just because they're focusing on other things. Ironically enough, I would say I have had more problems with adults that I've worked with than, and I say that, but it's actually quite sad because sometimes it's even been adults that were special education teachers that struggled to work with a person with a disability. And I won't get into, details there because those are sad stories, but just part of the hardship of working in a school with a disability. Sometimes the adults are harder to work with and are less kind than the kids. But overall, I've had great experiences with the kids, whether they're gen ed or special ed students.
That was I was sort of giggling while you were talking because that was my next question. I was going to ask you, how has been the response, not just of the adult teachers, but because I've been in this profession as well. And in addition to working with special ed students for 20 years, I also was a baseball coach and a football coach. And I was going to ask you, what is the response of the parents? Because parents can be a little iffy.
Yes, that's another great question. Thank you for asking that. I have had an extremely high success rate with parents. I'm not going to say I've never worked with a difficult parent or a parent that was, uneasy about me at first. But I would say that shortly after getting to know any parent that I've worked with, even the most difficult parents, I win them over. And I would say that the way I do that is because they see that Mr. C, again, likely has a disability, even if I haven't told them, they're able to perceive that I have some kind of disability. And I think too, once they see that I genuinely and deeply care for their child, their attitudes completely change in a positive way. Because I don't have any kids of my own, and so my students are my kids, right? Like those are my babies. I'll never forget. I have a quick story for you. One time I was walking a second grade class to recess, and we're walking across in the front of the building by the parking lot. And I'm telling the kids, I'm motioning to them. I'm like, hey, you guys got to stay on the sidewalk. Like, I need you guys in the line. I said, I can't have you, out here close to the street. I said, you guys are precious to Mr. C. You guys are like gold to Mr. C. And one little girl, I'll never forget, she said, well, you should thank us then. I said, why? She said, because we made you rich. So I think I've been very fortunate to have great experiences with parents. Some that I've had my first, second, third year that I keep in touch with to this day. Some of them have become my friends, great friends, close friends.
That's interesting. Now, we all have in education, we all have that one story, or we all have a broad set of stories, or we all can answer this question. And I want to ask you, what is, because I can share with you mine, but this isn't about me. I want to hear about you. What is the most rewarding part of being a special ed teacher in your career?
The most rewarding thing for me is building students who have good character and who build successful lives and become contributors to society, because there's such a big connotation for people with disabilities that they're just not going to be able to contribute or do this or do X, Y, and Z. And I always say that, success looks different for everybody, right? There's different kinds of smart, and success looks different for everybody. And so for one kid, success might be going to college and being an engineer. For another kid, success might be getting a good job at a restaurant as a restaurant manager. For someone else, success might be being a good dad and a good husband and raising a loving and happy family. And so, like I'm there to teach reading, writing, math, and behavior. But more important than that, I want to build kind individuals. I want to build character, and I want to teach kids that they can persevere and that they can overcome their challenges in life, whether it's disability or trauma or any other kind of obstacle in their past, right? Wow. And so those are some of the things that come to mind for me. And I would also say that another crowning example would be when my special ed students join my poetry workshops. And we have kids that have emotional disabilities, have reading disabilities, and then they get up in front of a crowd of 40, 50, 60 people, and they read something that they created. And that, to me, I'm thinking of two students in particular. One was a girl who wrote a lovely poem about when she was a newborn and she was premature. And she wrote a poem about how she had all these IVs in her and that the doctors had told her mom that she probably wouldn't make it to the next day. And then her older brother, who was about 4 years old at the time, went to Walmart and bought her a teddy bear and gave it to her that night. And in her poem, she says that the magic teddy must have worked because the next day I was still alive. Wow. And so seeing her get up there, seeing her create that poem in the first place, and then seeing her get up in front of the audience and read and share something that she created was just such a crowning achievement. I'll never forget it.
Wow. Well, Mark, you've been talking about it, and you've been elaborating on certain things, and you really inspired us. But you've been really talking about this thing called poetry and how you write poetry and how it has helped you and how you've been writing poetry. I have to ask this question before we go, and we're running out of time, but because they say time flies when you're having fun, but would you be willing to read a poem from your book? All right, great.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you. That's just awesome. I'm ready.
So the poem I think I'll read is called Special Education, and it's the first poem in my book. And it's about a student I had in my first and second year. And just a quick backdrop to it. We were taking the state assessment one day, and she really kind of didn't put forth a great effort, and so I kind of had to get on to her for that. Um, and then I'll never forget that night. I felt so horrible because she got upset that I got on to her. And again, of course, like when you have a relationship with someone and they're getting on to you, that hurts, right? That hurts.
Right.
And so just a little backdrop to this. It's called special education. There's so much to do for you, like teaching you how to ask to play with the other kids on the playground, when to borrow in subtraction, when not to walk behind me and give me bunny ears, to teach you to check your work, even if you're the right answer. Maybe it's the fetal alcohol syndrome that makes you forget to wash your hair, brush your teeth, and to ask for help, to sharpen your pencil that isn't dull. And you're always talking about that rock star with the blonde wig. Sometimes I want more for you, but usually I want you to want more. Dear patience, your eyes late with wonder, tapping the room as you look around for something to keep you, not those cold mornings when you couldn't sit up straight on the stone floors of the Russian orphanage where all you knew were new voices. There's a sympathy to you that pulls like a pretty face to a camera. You're a sad that never gets angry, a wing in a world without air. You don't push yourself to the front of the lunch line. You don't tell on every kid that calls you the R word. You smile, a smile told in two tenses, one now, the other improbably. And sometimes you interrupt me or call me crazy when I'm trying to teach you the vocabulary word of the day, or how to look both ways when you cross the street. And I want to call your mom so she can fix you like a shirt missing a button. But you walked into my classroom this morning, your pencil hidden behind your back, and gave me a note. Dear Mr. C, I am not going to be at school tomorrow. I am sorry. Can you please give me the homework? Thanks. Your expression, deep like pockets, laughing that laugh and a half when I give you sarcasm potted in a no. Nope. Dear patience, if you could not walk, I would not walk for you. I would not tell you to walk straight just to walk straight. I would let you stand on my shoes and push you just enough to build your balance so that nothing less could fall you over. I may have given the tests, but you taught me to never look a girl in the eye when she's crying and pretend like she's not. Thanks. P.S. You're a rock star.
Wow, that is amazing. I applaud you. That is simply amazing. Your skill is amazing. Your talent is amazing. Your gift to humanity is amazing. And I thank you for doing what you do, and thank you for being who you are.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, my friend, we're out of time, but thank you. How can we get in touch with you? Is there anything that we can connect with you, or anyone wants to ask you any questions, anything?
Yeah, so I also give motivational speeches at conferences and for school districts and universities about the power of positive relationships, about how kids today, whether they have disabilities or not, need positive relationships in their life. And so I have a website that supports that endeavor, and it's www.teacherwithtourettes.com. And that's Tourette's with an S at the end. I know some people say Tourette, but it's actually Tourette's on my website. And if anyone's interested, they can go to that website. Hopefully you can put it in the show notes as well.
Sure will.
And I would love to hear from anyone, whether anyone's interested in having me speak, whether someone wants to reach out to me about getting a copy of my book, or just say hello or ask a question. My email's on that website, and I would love to hear from anyone who would like to reach out.
Sounds great, my friend. Well, thank you for joining the Underground Subway, Mark Chartier. Let me get that correct. Mark Chartier, thank you so much, my friend, for joining me. I really am honored that you took time out of your busy schedule to talk to us and to inspire us. And hopefully we can get together again with you real soon and do this again.
Perfect. Thank you so much, David.
To our listeners, well, it's almost time. We're coming to the end of the underground subway as I hear the music playing, which means that the train is rolling into the station. When the train rolls in, the doors are going to open and you're going to have to get off for this edition. But rest assured, there's another train coming real soon, and we're going to have more quality and qualified guests to show you how you can live a better life. I want to give another special thanks to our special guest for this edition, Mark Chartier, who came and really inspired us and motivated us. Look at his information, get in touch with him. He will be a tremendous help to you, to your students, to your children, to you, as well as he's been to myself for this podcast. I appreciate you spending time with us for this edition of the Underground Subway. I thank you if you're listening on the treadmill, or if you're at work with your AirPods in your ear, or at home just around the house with your Bluetooth, or listening in the car while you're driving, wherever you may be. I take it not for granted that you took time out of your schedule to listen to the Underground Subway so that we all can live a better life. Well, my friends, we're out of time. We've got to go. The doors are open. You got to step out. But before you step out, I want to challenge you tonight before you go to bed tonight. Find a mirror. I want you to look yourself right in the eyes. And I want you to ask yourself a question. Today, did I do something to make this world a better place? Today, did I work toward my destiny in life? Or did I just waste another day? Think about that. We don't have any more time to waste. I'm David Austin, the conductor and your host of the Underground Subway. We'll see you next time right here. Do me a favor and have a great rest of the day and an even better tomorrow.